Hello and welcome to the cosmic Earth. Let us begin a slow journey, one that drifts far back in time, to an Earth that feels both familiar and impossibly strange. An Earth long before our kind, before mammals ruled, before flowering plants painted, the land in colors we recognize. Tonight, we return to an age when creatures, unlike any alive today, held dominion. The age of reptiles, the Mesozoic Era, a span of nearly 180 million years, vast enough that continents shifted, oceans rose and fell, and entire dynasties of life emerged and vanished. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this Earth. The year is not measured in thousands or even millions, but in the hundreds of millions. The clock turns back to a planet raw and reshaped, resting in the aftermath of something catastrophic. A silence lingers after a great dying, the end, extinction. It was the most devastating event life had ever endured. A moment when the vast majority of species, creatures of the seas, creatures of the land, creatures of the air all but disappeared. And yet, in this silence, a new chapter was waiting to unfold. The age of reptiles was not just the story of dinosaurs, though they would one day dominate its landscapes. It was the story of a planet healing, reshaping, and testing new forms of life. It was a story of resilience, of survival, of innovation written into the very fabric of evolution. Imagine standing at the dawn of the Mesozoic. The air feels warmer, heavy with carbon dioxide, the skies often hazy from volcanic breaths. The land beneath your feet is vast and unified. There is no Atlantic Ocean yet, no scattered continents. Instead, a single giant landmass stretches across much of the globe. Pangea, endless deserts sprawl inland, where few rains fall. Mountain ranges rise and crumble, and along the coasts, seas lap against beaches unlike any we know. This was the canvas on which the reptiles would paint their age. The term age of reptiles is soothingly simple, but it hides a complex truth. Not all reptiles were dinosaurs, and not all dinosaurs resembled the colossal giants we picture. Instead, life took many shapes: slender, fleet-footed hunters darting across ferny plains, lumbering herbivores grazing near rivers, marine reptiles gliding through shallow seas, their flippers slicing the waters like living ships overhead. The skies would one day fill with winged forms, shadows of pterosaurs carried on warm winds. But before all of this, Earth had to stabilize, to breathe again after the trauma of the great extinction. And in that fragile calm, the reptiles began their long rise. You might picture the early Triassic world as a place of simplicity: landscapes quiet, vegetation sparse, and creatures small. Mammal-like reptiles, remnants of the past, still lingered. But true reptiles, scaled, sunbasking, resilient, were stepping forward. Their bodies held an advantage: skin that held water, eggs that could rest safely on land, lungs that pulled in air with strength. In this age of uncertainty, these traits mattered. They were, in many ways, designed for survival. The story of this age is not only about who thrived, but about who disappeared. In the early dawn of the Mesozoic, entire groups of animals still carried on from the ancient past. Yet, as the centuries and millennia stretched into millions of years, the balance shifted. Reptiles outpaced them. They ran faster, they hunted more efficiently, they adapted with astonishing creativity. And with every passing epoch, they claimed more of Earth as their own. Think for a moment of the seas. The oceans of the Mesozoic were as alien as the land. Ancient reefs spread with corals and sponges. Strange shelled creatures called ammonites floated in spirals, drifting with currents that circled the supercontinent. Soon, enormous marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs would come to prowl these waters, creatures so well adapted that even whales today echo their forms. But all of that lay ahead. For now, in these early moments, the stage was being prepared. Above, the skies were empty of birds. No wings yet beat against the warm air. But already, small creatures were experimenting with glides, with leaps, with movement beyond the ground. Evolution was always testing, always reaching forward, searching for the next form. The Mesozoic was not a single moment, not a snapshot frozen in time, but a flow like a river, changing course, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. Across its 180 million years, climates would warm and cool, seas would rise and retreat, and mountains would be thrust skyward only to wear away again. Life, always, moved with these changes, responding in a dance older than memory to imagine. This age fully, you must step slowly through it, sensing not just the creatures, but the world that held them. The forests were not filled with flowers or buzzing bees. Instead, towering conifers stretched toward the sky, ferns carpeted the ground, and cycads spread their thick leaves in the sun. It was a green, ancient world, lacking the familiar blossoms and colors that today seem so natural. The air smelled of resin, of wet earth, of volcanic ashdot, and yet, within these forests and plains, new dramas unfolded. Small lizard-like creatures scurried through underbrush. Predators stalked their prey with patient silence. Each niche, each corner of the ecosystem was slowly being carved into shape. It was as if Earth itself was sketching, revising, and redrawing, shaping the first outlines of the Mesozoic tapestry. The phrase, "age of reptiles," carries with it a sense of grandeur. But for many millions of years, the world was not yet ruled by the giants we so often imagine. Instead, it was ruled by potential, by possibility. Dinosaurs, in their earliest forms, were unremarkable, small, quick, easily overlooked. Yet they were there, quietly waiting, slowly perfecting the traits that would one day carry them to dominance. This is one of the quiet wonders of Earth's history. How greatness often begins in obscurity. How the giants that would later shake the ground with their steps began as small, fragile creatures, unnoticed against the backdrop of the planet's immensity. The age of reptiles was also an age of patience. Evolution moves slowly, with experiments, measured in millions of years. Each adaptation, each shift in form, was tested against the relentless forces of nature. Survival required not brilliance in a single moment, but persistence across generations beyond counting. And so, this age unfolded, from the deserts of Pangea to the coasts of shallow seas, from fern-filled valleys to volcanic highlands. Reptiles grew and changed. The world healed from its wounds, and in that healing, it gave rise to an era unlike any other. As you rest and listen, let your mind drift across that ancient world. Picture the red sands of inland deserts, stretching endlessly beneath a blazing sun. Imagine the hush of forests where cycads stand silent, their leaves unmoving in heavy air. Hear the distant rumble of volcanoes, their smoke painting streaks across the sky. And somewhere, in this vast alien land, a small reptile pauses, its eyes bright, its body poised between past and future. That reptile could not know what was coming: the age of giants, the reign of dinosaurs, the spread of wings across the skies. But in its existence, the seeds of that future were alive. The age of reptiles was a bridge between worlds, between the life that came before and the life that would come after. It was not just the story of dinosaurs, but of Earth itself, reshaping, recovering, and rising again. And as we move forward in this journey, you will see how this age, born in silence and survival, blossomed into an era of power, diversity, and beauty unlike any other in the planet's history. The Earth was ready, the reptiles were rising, and the story had only just begun. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet that follows devastation. The world had just endured the greatest extinction event it would ever know. 90% of species in the oceans were gone. On land, most animals had vanished as well. Forests collapsed. The Earth was not empty, but it was silent in ways we can hardly comprehend. If you stood then, at the edge of that catastrophe, you would have looked across landscapes that felt abandoned. Once steaming seas were still. Rivers wound through barren plains. The very air was heavy with the ghosts of what had been came. It was, in many ways, the closest Earth ever came to starting over. But even in such darkness, life does not yield entirely. Some creatures survived. Small, resilient, often unremarkable yet. They carried the spark forward, and from this fragile beginning, the Mesozoic Era would slowly rise. The great extinction was fueled by fire, heat, and poison. Vast volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released unimaginable quantities of lava, gases, and ash. The skies filled with carbon dioxide, warming the Earth to extremes. Oceans grew acidic, stripped of oxygen. This was not a single day, nor even a single year. It was a long catastrophe, unfolding over hundreds of thousands of years. Emerged into a different world. The land was scarred. Deserts stretched further, for rain was scarce under the greenhouse heat. Rivers carved through bare soils, their banks lacking the forests that once stabilized them. The air, though warming, still carried the breath of ash and sulfur. Yet, slowly, patiently, green began to return. Ferns were among the first, carpeting the ground where once there was only dust. Conifers rose where conditions allowed, spreading forests of tall, needle-like leaves. Life, step by step, rebuilt its foundation. Among the animals, too, there were remnants of the past. Small amphibians clung to streams and ponds. Insects buzzed and adapted to the new plants that appeared. But it was the reptiles that seemed most ready to claim this altered Earth. Their dry, scaly skin held water against the desiccating air. Their eggs, safe on land, allowed them to spread where amphibians could not. They were not yet dominant, but they were prepared. The world after the extinction was a world of opportunity as much as it was a world of loss. Species opened doors for innovation, and slowly, through time measured in millions of years, this devastation became the seedbed of the age of reptiles. Picture Pangea then, the single massive continent that held most of Earth's land. It stretched nearly from pole to pole, a giant shield of stone ringed by shallow seas. Its interior was harsh. Vast deserts, where rain rarely fell, marked by extremes of heat by day and cold by night. Along its coasts, however, life was more forgiving. Rivers nourished vegetation, and shallow waters offered refuge to marine creatures rebuilding after the extinction. It was here, in these zones between harshness and abundance, that reptiles began their ascent. The first part of the Mesozoic, the Triassic period, was a time of recovery and experimentation. Early reptiles took many forms. Some were small, lizard-like, darting between ferns in search of insects, tested new strategies, new possibilities, as life refilled the emptiness left by the catastrophe. You might imagine this world as quieter than our own, but not lifeless. In the evenings, the calls of amphibians still echoed by ponds. Insects whirred above ferns. The wind whispered across broad plains. And beneath that surface, quiet, immense change was underway. For this was not just the beginning of the dinosaurs, though they were among the small reptiles of the Triassic. It was also the beginning of many creatures that would shape the Mesozoic. Crocodile-like reptiles rose in the swamps. Marine reptiles flourished in the seas. Even the ancestors of mammals, survivors from the Permian, continued to evolve, holding on as small, shrew-like beings in the shadows. The extinction had wiped the slate nearly clean. Now, Earth was rewriting its story, but rebuilding was not simple. The climate of the early Triassic was harsh. Heat lingered, deserts expanded, plants struggled in the aridity. It took millions of years for ecosystems to stabilize, for complex food webs to reappear. And yet, in that time, resilience proved itself again and again. Each fern frond that unfurled, each reptile hatchling that survived, was part of the planet's long recovery. The world after the extinction teaches us something profound about the nature of life, that even in the face of near-total destruction, even when all seems lost, there remains a stubbornness, a quiet insistence to continue. Life adapts, it bends, it reshapes itself, and in doing so, it creates new wonders. As the Triassic unfolded, reptiles grew bolder. Some stood more upright, their limbs shifting beneath their bodies for greater speed. Others stretched their necks, long to reach leaves, or their jaws sharp to pierce prey. Evolution favored the experimenters, and the earth rewarded those who endured. The oceans, too, filled again. New reefs formed. Light, fish diversified. And soon, the first great marine reptiles appeared. Sleek hunters adapted to the vast blue world. What had once been a planet in ruin was, step by step, becoming alive again. The extinction had been a firestorm, but from its ashes, the age of reptiles truly began to take shape. As you rest and imagine this long-vanished time, think of the resilience it represents. The earth was nearly broken, yet from near silence, a symphony returned. The forests regrew. The rivers ran full again. The seas shimmered with life. And on the land, the small, resilient reptiles of the Triassic would become the ancestors of creatures that would one day tower above the trees. World of renewal. Fragile, uncertain, yet filled with potential. A reminder that even the darkest chapters of Earth's story can be followed by rebirth. And so, the silence that followed devastation slowly gave way to sound, once more the quiet stirrings of the age of reptiles. If you close your eyes, you might try to picture the Earth in the earliest chapters of the Triassic period. The age of recovery had begun. The Earth, scarred and silent after the great dying, was slowly being painted anew. The landscapes of this time were stark, raw, and strangely unfamiliar. They did not resemble the green, abundant Earth you know today. Instead, they were a world still piecing itself back together, carrying the marks of catastrophe, yet also whispering the first hints of renewal. Imagine standing on Pangea, the single immense continent that dominated this time. From horizon to horizon stretched a landmass so vast it seemed endless. It was ringed by wide, shallow seas, but its center, far from any coast, was arid and harsh. Much of Pangea's interior was desert, vast and unforgiving. Rolling dunes stretched like oceans of sand. Cracked salt flats shimmered in the heat. The air was dry, the sun relentless. Rain was rare, arriving only in seasonal bursts, and yet, along rivers and near coasts, life clung stubbornly. Ferns unfurled their fronds across floodplains. Conifers reached upward, their tall shapes breaking the monotony of desert. Horsetails clustered by streams, their hollow stems swaying in the wind. In these oases of green, the earliest Triassic animals made their homes. The Triassic dawn was not lush, but it was alive. The landscapes reflected balance between desert and forest, emptiness and renewal, silence and the cautious return of sound. The rivers of this world were lifelines. They carried fresh water through parched terrain, drawing plants and animals alike to their banks. Amphibians lingered in the shallows, their slick bodies glistening in the dim light. Insects skimmed across the surface, wings catching the glow of the rising sun. Small reptiles crept carefully along the edges, their scales blending into the dust and ferns. These rivers were narrow corridors of abundance, green threads woven into an otherwise dry and red-brown land, and beyond them lay the sea, vast, patient, and slowly filling with life again. The oceans of the Triassic were still healing from the extinction, but here to life stirred. Ammonites floated gently, their spiral shells glistening like ornaments beneath the water. Fish swam through reefs that were beginning to regrow, and soon marine reptiles, the ichthyosaurs and nothosaurs, would rise, claiming the seas with sleek forms built for pursuit and grace. The landscapes above, meanwhile, were shaped not only by life, but also by fire and stone. Pangea was restless. Deep within, tectonic forces pulled and twisted, and though the supercontinent still held together, rifts began to form. Volcanic activity sometimes reshaped entire regions. Lava spilled across plains, ash fell like strange snow, and in the shifting, unstable land, new habitats emerged. The Triassic Earth was a place of contrasts. Wide deserts against narrow forests, towering conifers against low carpets of ferns, scorching heat by day and chilling cold by night. Each contrast shaped the lives that found their way here, forcing resilience and adaptation. Those who could not endure the swings of climate faded away. Those who could flourished. If you wandered across these early Triassic landscapes, you would not yet find the dinosaurs that dominate our imagination. Not yet. Instead, you would meet their ancestors, small, tentative creatures, testing the possibilities of upright limbs, quick strides, and sharp teeth. They were not giants, but they were pioneers. And scattered among them were the ancestors of crocodiles, two long-bodied, armored reptiles that lurked by the rivers, waiting for an unwary amphibian or smaller reptile to draw near. But perhaps the most striking part of this dawn landscape was not the animals at all, but the air itself. The climate of the Triassic was strange compared to our own. With a single massive continent, global weather patterns moved differently. Rain often fell heavily along coasts, but rarely reached the continental interior. Winds carried heat and dust across vast distances. Storms could rage along the seas, while deep inland silence ruled beneath an unbroken sun. It was a world of extremes, sculpted by its very shape. You might picture the sky at dusk, the horizon glowing orange, shadows stretching long across dunes. A herd of small reptiles hurrying toward a grove of conifers for shelter, the hiss of insects rising with the night, and above, stars emerging one by one, familiar yet strange, shining down on a planet still in the process of recovery. These landscapes were not static. They shifted and changed across millions of years. Forests crept further inland as climates eased. Rivers carved new paths, bringing green to barren plains. In some regions, lush swamps began to form again, recalling the great wetlands of the past. And through all of this, reptiles multiplied and diversified, filling roles once held by others. The Triassic dawn was a laboratory of evolution. Insects evolved to pollinate new plant species. Reptiles branched into hunters, foragers, and swimmers. Amphibians, though fewer, held their ground in streams and ponds. And hidden in the shadows, small, fur-covered synapsids, the ancestors of mammals waited, surviving in burrows and feeding on insects in the night. The land itself bore marks of deep time. Mountains loomed where continents had collided, basins filled with shallow seas, their shores dotted with new life. In some places, the ground still glowed with heat from ancient lava flows. Fossils from this era tell of diversity slowly building. Again, a steady crescendo rising from silence. But to imagine this world fully, you must also picture its sounds. The rustle of conifer needles in the wind, the soft splash of amphibians slipping into a stream, the distant rumble of thunder across a desert plain. And in the night, the cries of early reptiles echoing through still air. It was not the noise of abundance, but the quiet song of beginnings. It is easy to forget that the Triassic dawn was fragile. Ecosystems were still unstable, vulnerable to shifts in climate or sudden disasters. Species could rise quickly, then vanish just as suddenly. Yet over millions of years, stability returned. Forests thickened, rivers broadened, oceans swelled with fish and shells. By the middle of the Triassic, life was not just surviving, it was thriving. And this, perhaps, is what makes the landscapes of the Triassic dawn so fascinating. They remind us of resilience, not in the form of abundance, but in the patience of beginnings, of ferns pushing through barren ground, of rivers carving life through deserts, of small reptiles testing the first steps toward forms that would one day dominate the earth. Imagine walking along a Triassic shoreline, the sand warm beneath your feet, the air heavy with salt. Behind you, red cliffs rise, dotted with sparse vegetation. Ahead, the sea stretches endless and blue, its surface broken by the leap of a fish or the spiral drift of an ammonite shell. Somewhere in the distance, a reptile slips quietly into the waves, the first of many to call the ocean home. These were landscapes, both alien and familiar, strange to us in their emptiness, yet familiar in their patterns. Rivers, forests, deserts, mountains, seas. Earth's elements were the same, but arranged in a different order, a different rhythm. It was still our world, but in the process of becoming something new. And from these landscapes, the age of reptiles would rise. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, crocodiles, and more would all trace their lineage back to these dawn environments, shaped by deserts and rivers, by forests and seas. The Triassic landscapes were the canvas upon which the great experiment of the Mesozoic was painted. So when you think of the Triassic dawn, think of silence after catastrophe. Think of ferns pushing green against red desert. Think of small reptiles testing their place in a vast, empty world. And remember that from such fragile beginnings, the greatest creatures Earth has ever known would soon emerge. The dawn was quiet, but it was not empty. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. If the land of the Triassic dawn was dry, vast, and scattered with fragile beginnings, the oceans told a very different story. Here, in the waters that wrapped around Pangea, life found a refuge. The seas, though wounded by extinction, were quicker to heal than the land, and in their depths, New and strange creatures rose to fill the spaces left empty by the great dying. Imagine standing on the shores of this ancient world. Behind you, deserts stretch wide, forests cling to rivers, and reptiles stalk cautiously across open ground. But before your eyes and ears, the ocean moves in eternal rhythm. The waves crash, retreat, and return, whispering against the sand. The scent of salt lingers in the air. Above, seabirds as we know them do not yet exist. Instead, the skies are empty, waiting for wings still to come. Yet beneath the water, an entire realm of activity is unfolding here. The survivors of catastrophe gather. Fish glide through the shallows, their silver scales flashing in the sun. Crustaceans scuttle along the sandy bottom, leaving trails that the waves quickly erase. And drifting just below the surface, delicate ammonites float spiraled shells, catching the light, their tentacles reaching outward, sensing, exploring. These creatures, cousins of the squid and octopus, were among the ocean's great survivors. Their forms were ancient, their strategies timeless, but alongside them were newcomers, reptiles, who had left the land behind to master the seas. Picture the ichthyosaurs, among the most remarkable beings of the Triassic oceans. Their bodies were built for speed, long, sleek, and fish-like, with powerful tails that propelled them through the waves. Their eyes were enormous, perfect for catching light in deep or murky waters. They hunted fish and squid with swift precision, darting through schools of prey in graceful arcs. If you watched from the surface, you might see them leap, breaking the waves in glittering sprays, before vanishing again into the blue dot. In time, ichthyosaurs would become giants, as large as whales. But in these early Triassic seas, they were still finding their form, some no longer than a dolphin, yet already showing the adaptations that would carry them through millions of years. Then there were the nothosaurs. These reptiles were more hesitant wanderers, their bodies stretched and slender, their limbs still suited for both swimming and crawling on land. You might imagine them basking on a rocky shore, then sliding into the water, their long necks weaving as they hunted fish close to the surface. They were creatures of two worlds, never fully of the land, nor fully of the sea. In their half-committed forms, you see the story of evolution unfolding in slow motion. The Triassic oceans also gave rise to placodonts, unusual reptiles with broad, flat teeth designed for crushing shells. They swam close to the seafloor, prying open clams and oysters, their heavy bodies built for slow but steady movement. Some developed bony armor along their backs, like natural shields, reminding us of turtles to come. They were specialists in their niche, quiet gatherers in a sea full of hunters, and still the ammonites drifted, their spirals like delicate signatures left across the ocean. Their shells varied from tight, intricate coils to looser, open spirals. Each design was a solution to the same challenge: how to float, how to move, how to survive. They were beautiful, fragile, and resilient, a reminder that even in the face of extinction, creativity in life always continues. The oceans of the Triassic were not uniform. Along the coasts, shallow lagoons formed, rich with fish and invertebrates. Coral reefs, though diminished by the extinction, began to recover. Small reef builders stitched together structures where countless creatures found shelter. These were the nurseries of the sea, the places where life multiplied in safety. Further offshore, the waters deepened into vast plains of open sea. Here, ichthyosaurs and nothosaurs ruled, their sleek forms built for distance and endurance. Predators and prey performed their endless dance, weaving through schools of fish, chasing and fleeing in patterns as old as time itself. And then, In the darkest depths, silence stretched. Few creatures dared to descend here, where sunlight faded into black. But those that did evolved strange forms: fish with wide jaws, luminous organs, and eerie shapes. Even in the Triassic, the deep sea was a world apart, mysterious and haunting, its secrets known only to those who lived and died in its shadows. If you listen closely, you might almost hear the sound of these ancient seas, the muffled rush of waves above, the soft rasp of shells moving against sand, the flicker of fins breaking water, the distant call of a predator as it surfaces for breath. It is a soundscape both familiar and alien, echoing across millions of years. The creatures of the Triassic oceans were more than survivors, they were innovators. They pioneered new ways of living, new shapes, new roles in the ecosystem. Some became swift hunters, others armored grazers, still others delicate drifters. Together, they stitched the oceans back into a living, breathing whole. And yet, even here, the fingerprints of the great dying remained. Whole groups of creatures had vanished forever. Trilobites, once masters of the seafloor, were gone. Rugose corals had disappeared. The gaps left behind were filled by new forms, but the memory of absence lingered. The Triassic seas were both a monument to loss and a celebration of resilience. As time passed, the oceans shaped the course of life on land as well. Marine reptiles grew large and powerful, setting the stage for future dominance. Ammonites flourished, leaving behind fossils that now mark the passage of ages in stone. Fish diversified, experimenting with forms that would lead toward the creatures we recognize today. The ocean was not simply a backdrop, was a driving force, a cradle where innovation could thrive. Imagine walking along a Triassic shoreline at dusk. The air is warm, the sky painted red by the setting sun. Waves lap gently against the rocks. In the distance, a nothosaur slips into the water, its long neck weaving as it glides away. An ichthyosaur leaps, its body arcing in a spray of silver, droplets before vanishing beneath the waves. And all around, hidden beneath the surface, countless smaller lives stir, each one playing its part in the great web of survival. The oceans of the Triassic remind us of the dual nature of life: fragile and enduring, vulnerable and inventive. They were alive with strange creatures, many of whom would not last beyond this period. Yet through their strangeness, they built the foundation for what was to come. The seas carried Earth forward. They took the silence of extinction and filled it with motion once again. They transformed absence into abundance, and fear into adaptation. And though the Triassic oceans have long since vanished, their echoes remain in the fossils we study, in the creatures that still swim today, and in the endless, eternal rhythm of the sea itself. Close your eyes, and you might still hear it: the gentle murmur of waves, the flicker of something moving just below, the presence of lives long gone, yet not forgotten, suspended forever in the memory of water. The earth was changing again. From the deserts and recovering forests of the Triassic, through the seas, alive with strange creatures, time carried the world forward into something grander. Slowly, patiently, the stage was being set for a reign. Unlike any other, the rise of the dinosaurs, the Triassic had introduced them: small, upright reptiles, agile and alert, darting through underbrush, hunting insects, scavenging scraps, keeping out of the way of larger predators. They were not yet kings of the land. They were survivors, opportunists. But in the slow rhythm of millions of years, survival can transform into dominance. And so, as the Triassic gave way to the Jurassic, And later to the Cretaceous, dinosaurs began to grow. They grew in size, in number, in variety. They adapted. To every landscape the earth offered them: forests, plains, mountains, swamps. In time, they would rule the land with a mastery no group of animals had achieved before or since. Imagine waking in their world. The air is thick, warm, humid. The land is greener than the Triassic desert plains, as forests of conifers and cycads spread wide. Ferns carpet the ground. Towering tree-like plants rise into the canopy. Streams cut through the valleys, and the sound of water joins the chorus of insects buzzing, leaves rustling, and distant calls echoing through the trees. And then the ground begins to tremble. From the forest's edge steps a creature so vast that the trees themselves seem dwarfed by its size. Its neck arches high above, sweeping across the canopy like a living bridge. Its tail, massive and muscular, drags or whips behind it, balancing its enormous frame. This is a sauropod, one of the giants that would define the reign of the dinosaurs. Sauropods were marvels of engineering. With long necks, small heads, barrel-shaped bodies, and pillar-like legs, they were built to feed where few others could reach. They stripped leaves from the tallest trees, grazing not on the ground but in the sky. Herds of them could transform entire landscapes, consuming vast quantities of vegetation each day. Their hearts had to be powerful enough to pump blood up their towering necks. Their sheer bulk was a form of protection few predators could challenge. A fully grown giant. Some sauropods, like Brachiosaurus, carried their heads high, like living cranes, feeding far above their kin. Others, like Diplodocus, stretched their necks outward, sweeping across wide ranges of low vegetation. And still others, like Argentinosaurus, would one day become among the largest land animals to ever walk the earth, their bodies stretching over 30 meters in length. But sauropods were not alone. For every giant, there was a hunter. Imagine a shadow moving through the forest, silent but powerful. Its legs are strong, its body built for speed and strength, its eyes fix on movement, its jaws lined with sharp, curved teeth. This is a theropod. The great predators of the Mesozoic theropods came in many forms. In the Jurassic, creatures like Allosaurus hunted in packs, challenging even the mighty sauropods, targeting the weak or the young. They were agile, with long tails for balance, and claws sharp enough to tear through flesh. Their movements were quick, decisive, efficient, the mark of a predator at the top of its game. Later, in the Cretaceous, one of their kind would become legend, Tyrannosaurus rex, with a skull nearly as long as a man is tall, with teeth the size of bananas. T-Rex embodied raw power. Yet even this king of the late Cretaceous was only one branch of a tree that had spread wide. Theropods ranged from giants to creatures no larger than a chicken, darting among ferns, chasing insects, and filling countless niches in their ecosystems. The reign of the dinosaurs was not built on predators and giants alone. It was a world of balance, of endless variation. There were the stegosaurs, armored with plates that rose like sails along their backs, their tails ending in sharp spikes, defense against the predators who prowled nearby. There were ankylosaurs, squat and heavily armored, their bodies like living tanks, their tails tipped with clubs strong enough to shatter bone. There were ceratopsians, like triceratops, with horns and frills, displaying both beauty and power as they moved in herds across grassy plains. And among them all, smaller dinosaurs thrived, weaving between the shadows of giants. Agile ornithopods, like Hypsilophodon, grazed and fled, their speed, their greatest defense. Duck-billed hadrosaurs, with broad beaks and complex teeth, flourished in herds, their calls echoing across wetlands. Some had crests upon their heads, hollow and resonant, like natural instruments used to call to one another across vast distances. Everywhere you looked, dinosaurs filled the world, but the reign of the dinosaurs was not only about the animals themselves, it was about the earth they shaped, and the earth that shaped them. Continents were drifting. Pangea, once united, was breaking apart. Oceans widened, climates shifted, and habitats multiplied. Dinosaurs spread with them, adapting to new environments, evolving into new forms. Their dominance was not just luck, it was flexibility. They could be giants in one place, swift runners in another, armored tanks in yet another dot. And then there were the skies, not dinosaurs themselves, but their close cousins, the pterosaurs. The air with wings of stretched membrane, some no larger than sparrows, others with wingspans rivaling small planes. They filled the skies with motion. They dived for fish, skimmed across rivers, soared above forests, and perched along rocky cliffs. Their presence completed the rain, land, sea, and sky, all dominated by reptiles of the age. Imagine sitting quietly in a Jurassic Valley. A herd of sauropods moves slowly across the horizon, their massive bodies shifting the very ground. Smaller dinosaurs scatter in their wake, feeding on what they leave behind. From the cliffs, a pterosaur leaps into the air, its wings catching the warm currents, circling above. And in the shadows, unseen but always present, a predator waits. The air is thick with sound, the calls of herds, the cries of hunters, the low rumble of giants passing by. The reign of the dinosaurs lasted for more than 160 million years. To place that in perspective, humans, in our modern form, have existed for only a few 100,000. Civilization has lasted for mere thousands. Yet dinosaurs ruled, without rival, for an expanse of time that seems almost incomprehensible. They rose, they diversified, they conquered nearly every landscape, and they were not static. Evolution continued its endless dance. Some dinosaurs grew feather-soft, filament-like structures at first, perhaps for warmth, later for display, and finally for flight. From these feathered theropods, a new lineage would emerge. Birds, even as the age of dinosaurs seemed eternal. The seeds of the next chapter were already being written. The reign of the dinosaurs was not without struggle. Predators and prey were locked in endless cycles of adaptation. Ecosystems faced droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions, continents shifted, climates cooled and warmed again. But through it all, the dinosaurs endured. Their reign was not fragile, it was resilient, expansive, endlessly inventive. And yet, as we know, even the greatest reigns eventually end. If you close your eyes, you can picture their world as though it were still alive. The forests of towering conifers, the plains shaking under the footsteps of giants, the skies filled with wings, the rivers alive with movement, the nights echoing with calls unfamiliar to our ears. It is a world both alien and familiar, long gone but forever etched in the stones beneath our feet. The reign of the giant. Dinosaurs was not merely a chapter in Earth's history, was a symphony of survival, adaptation, and grandeur. A reminder that life, when given time, can take shapes beyond imagination, and though their age has passed, their legacy remains. In every fossil uncovered, in every bird that takes flight, in every story we tell of their greatness, the reign of the dinosaurs continues. Above the thundering footsteps of sauropods, above the rustling of ferns in the wind, above the rivers that wound through ancient valleys, there was another kingdom, a world not of towering giants on land, but of grace and wings in the open sky. The Mesozoic skies were never empty. While dinosaurs roamed below, their cousins, the pterosaurs, filled the heavens with motion, from the smallest fluttering forms no bigger than a sparrow, to the vast shadows of giants with wingspans greater than a modern glider. The skies were alive, always alive, with flight. You might picture them as silent, but they were not. The air was threaded with sound, the flapping of leathery wings, the sharp cries of territorial calls, the chatter of colonies along cliffsides. At dawn, the skies stirred first, before the forests below. At dusk, silhouettes circled high above as the light dimmed, and for over 150 million years, they ruled an aerial realm that belonged to no other. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a warm, shallow lagoon. The water glitters with the reflection of a prehistoric sun. The air is heavy with heat and the salt of the sea. Suddenly, from the cliff face behind you, a shape bursts forward. Its wings stretch wide, the membrane taut between elongated fingers. Its body is light, its bones hollow. With a few powerful strokes, it rises upward, catches a warm current of air, and glides effortlessly into the blue. This is a pterosaur, an ancient pioneer of true flight, long before birds, long before mammals ever dreamed of taking to the skies. Pterosaurs had already claimed the air. They were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, evolving not from dinosaurs, but from close relatives and offshoot of the great reptilian family tree. Their wings were marvels of design, a skin and muscle membrane stretched along the arm and anchored to an elongated fourth finger, strong and flexible, capable of folding and stretching with precision. Some, like Rhamphorhynchus, were small and delicate, their long tails tipped with diamond-shaped veins, steering them through the breeze. Others, like Pteranodon, soared with wingspans as wide as 6 meters, gliding across the oceans in search of fish. And then there were the giant Scutzpelcoatless, whose wings could stretch more than 10 meters, casting shadows across entire river valleys as they lifted from the ground in sudden, breathtaking leaps. The skies were not uniform. Each layer of air was filled with different lives, different strategies. Some pterosaurs skimmed low across the waves, their sharp beaks snapping at fish that darted near the surface. Others soared high above, masters of thermal currents, able to glide for hours with barely a beat of their wings. Colonies nested along cliffsides, where the air currents lifted them easily into the sky. They crowded rocky ledges, their cries mingling with the crash of ancient seas. But pterosaurs were not alone forever. As the Jurassic War on quiet revolution was unfolding, certain theropod dinosaurs, small feathered hunters with sharp eyes and agile bodies, began to experiment with feathers, not just for warmth or display, but for gliding, for leaping, for catching air. Archaeopteryx, often celebrated as the first bird, spread its feathered wings across the skies of the late Jurassic somewhere around 150 million years ago. It was not the strongest flyer, not yet the master of the sky. Its wings were feathered but imperfect, its tail still long and reptilian, its teeth sharp, its claws strong enough to climb. But it had something new, feathers shaped for flight, and a body adapting to a new way of life. From Archaeopteryx would come the great lineage of birds, a lineage that still survives today. Imagine that transition, that delicate crossing of a boundary. On one branch of the family tree, pterosaurs soared on membranous wings, already perfected in their art. On another, small dinosaurs, were experimenting with feathers, fumbling their way toward a different kind of flight. For a time, they shared the skies together to different solutions to the same eternal challenge: how to live between earth and heaven. The diversity was astonishing. You might picture the skies of the Cretaceous not as quiet emptiness, but as a layered metropolis of life. Small feathered birds darting between tree canopies, catching insects in midair. Larger birds with toothed beaks and strong wings, flying in flocks across open plains. Pterosaurs in all sizes, filling the high thermals and coasts, gliding across oceans that stretched far beyond the horizon. Each niche, each altitude was alive. Their shadows touched everything. Herds of hadrosaurs lifted their heads as a flock passed overhead. Crocodile-like creatures, basking by rivers, snapped at low-flying pterosaurs that skimmed to near. Predators watched the skies as well as the ground, for danger could strike from above just as easily as from the underbrush. And the skies themselves were changing. The earth was restless, continents drifted further apart, oceans grew wider, climates shifted, winds strengthened. The skies became pathways, not barriers. Flying creatures could cross seas, explore new lands, expand their reach in ways that land-bound creatures could not. Flight gave freedom, and with freedom came survival. But it was not an easy life. The sky is as dangerous as it is beautiful. Storms swept across coasts with sudden violence, tossing fragile wings in their fury. Strong winds could drive creatures far from their nests, leaving them exhausted, stranded. Predators lurked not just on the ground, but in the air. Larger pterosaurs hunted smaller ones, while sharp-taloned birds attacked anything that strayed too close to their territories. Yet still, life flourished. Colonies of pterosaurs, numbering in the thousands, bred along cliffs. Bird-like dinosaurs flitted through Mesozoic forests. Some evolved brilliant displays of feathers, flashing colors to attract mates or signal dominance. Others developed specialized beaks, some broad and duck-like for sifting plants, others sharp and hooked for tearing flesh. The skies became not just a highway, but a theater of endless variation. If you close your eyes, you can imagine it. A warm breeze lifts against your face. Above you, shadows cross the sun, some small, some vast. A flock of toothed seabirds wheels overhead, their cries echoing as they dive toward the surf. Far higher, a giant pterosaur circles slowly, its wings catching invisible rivers of rising air. Closer to the forest, feathered shapes dart quickly, bright flashes of color between the green. And everywhere, the rhythm of wing beats, the constant motion of life above. It is easy to forget, here in the modern world, that flight was once new, once revolutionary. Today, we take the presence of birds for granted. But in the Mesozoic, the sky was still an expanding frontier, a place being conquered in slow, careful steps by two great families, pterosaurs and birds. Their reign would not last forever. By the end of the Cretaceous, birds would begin to outlast their cousins. Pterosaurs, once rulers of the air, dwindled. The smaller species disappeared first, unable to compete with the agility and adaptability of birds. Only the giants remained, the colossal asdarchids, with wingspans greater than any bird before or since. And then, with the Great Extinction, at the close of the Cretaceous, the last shadows of pterosaurs vanished forever. But birds survived. They carried forward the legacy of flight, refined and perfected into the new world after the dinosaurs. Every bird you see today, every sparrow, every eagle, every hummingbird, is a living echo of that Mesozoic experiment. When you hear wings beating in the still air, You are hearing the continuation of a story that began over 150 million years ago. The skies of the Mesozoic remind us of the deep patience of life. The earth is never silent, never still. It invents, it reinvents, it experiments. It fills every space, every opportunity, even the vast emptiness of the air above. And for millions upon millions of years, wings and shadows moved endlessly across that open canvas. When you imagine the age of dinosaurs, it is easy to think only of the ground of thundering footsteps, of teeth and claws, of towering giants. But if you lift your gaze, you will see another age layered above, a kingdom of the air, fragile and strong, fleeting and eternal. A reminder that even in the deepest past, the sky has always belonged to the brave. Beneath the skies filled with wings and shadows, there was another kingdom, quiet, patient, and enduring. A world of green, stretching across valleys, swamps, and highlands. It was not the animals alone that shaped the Mesozoic world, but the plants that stood in silence around them. Imagine yourself walking through that ancient world. The air is heavy, rich with moisture, filled with the earthy scent of damp soil and resin. Around you rise trees taller than modern buildings, their trunks straight and column-like, their branches spiraling outward in vast crowns. Between them, carpets of ferns cover the ground, delicate fronds unfurling like green lace in the dappled light. The forest floor is shaded, yet alive, filled with whispers of insects and the quiet movement of small reptiles and mammals. This was the true backdrop of the age of reptiles. The forests, the plants, the deep-rooted web of life that nourished everything else. For while the dinosaurs roamed and the pterosaurs soared, it was the plants that made their existence possible, capturing sunlight, drawing it down into food and energy, spreading life outward through roots and leaves. In the Triassic, long before the great sauropods rose to dominance, the world was already green, but its forests were different from our own. Flowering plants, the colorful blossoms we know today, did not yet exist. Instead, the forests were filled with ferns, cycads, horsetails, and towering conifers. These plants created landscapes both familiar and strange. Ferns were everywhere, from the tiniest ground-hugging varieties to tree ferns that stretched several meters high. They filled the undergrowth with feathered fronds, soaking in the humid air. You might imagine the ground beneath your feet, springy with layers of fallen fronds decomposing slowly into rich soil. The ferns were survivors, plants that had thrived since the time before dinosaurs, and which continue to thrive today, reminders of the deep past living in our gardens and forests. Cycads added another, shaped to the scenery. Stout, palm-like plants with crowns of stiff leaves and large cone-like seeds. They were so abundant in the Mesozoic that this era is sometimes called the Age of Cycads. In the warm climates of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, cycads dotted the landscapes like green sentinels, offering food for herbivorous dinosaurs. Imagine a herd of stegosaurs pushing through a cycad grove, their beaks clipping leaves, their heavy footsteps cracking fallen cones beneath them. And then there were the conifers, the giants of the Mesozoic forests. Relatives of pines and redwoods, they rose high into the canopy, their needles catching sunlight in thick mats of green. Some, like the araucarias, grew in symmetrical spirals, their branches forming perfect whorls as they reached skyward. Others spread wide, shading the ground below. Their cones carried seeds, tough and resilient, scattered by the wind or by the creatures that fed upon them. The forests of araucarias were vast, stretching across what is now South America. Australia, and Antarctica, their silhouettes dominating the ancient horizon. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing within one of these forests. The air is still. Shafts of light pierce the canopy in golden beams, illuminating motes of dust and spores drifting slowly downward. A dragonfly, enormous compared to the ones you know, flutters past, its wings catching the light. In the distance, the rhythmic cracking of wood echoes faintly, the sound of a sauropod feeding stripping branches with its peg-like teeth. You feel the ground tremble softly with its movement. Around your feet, ferns brush your legs. The forest breathes around you, timeless and immense. These forests were not static. They evolved alongside the creatures that lived among them. As herbivores grew larger, so too did the plants adapt. Some developed tough leaves, resistant to chewing. Others produced toxins, chemical defenses to ward off hungry mouths. The dance of predator and prey was mirrored in the silent dance of plant and herbivore. Every bite, every meal, was part of a cycle, millions of years in the making. And the forests were not only home to giants, they sheltered the small, the hidden, the overlooked. In the shadows, mammals scurried among the roots, their fur insulating them from the cool nights. Lizards and amphibians found refuge in the damp undergrowth. Insects hummed, their wings catching the filtered light. Spiders spun webs between low ferns, while beetles burrowed beneath decaying logs. Life was everywhere, at every scale, woven into the fabric of the forest. Near rivers and lakes, horsetails rose in dense stands, their hollow stems jointed like bamboo, their spores drifting in the breeze. These plants thrived in wetlands, creating thickets that lined the edges of water bodies. In their midst, turtles slid silently into the shallows, while crocodile-like creatures basked on the banks. Overhead, flocks of small feathered dinosaurs darted between branches, catching insects on the wing. Forests also shaped the climate itself. Their leaves captured carbon from the atmosphere. Their roots stabilized soil. Their sheer size influenced rainfall and air currents. The earth of the Mesozoic was warm, humid, filled with oxygen-rich air. Forests were engines of this stability, part of a vast system that sustained the giant creatures we marvel at today. Without the green world, there could have been no age of dinosaurs. In time, a profound transformation unfolded. Around 130 million years ago, flowering plants, angiosperms, began to appear. At first, they were modest, small herbs at the edges of streams and clearings, but slowly, steadily, they spread. They offered something new, blossoms that attracted pollinators, seeds enclosed in fruit, faster growth than their older counterparts. Insects co-evolved with them, developing specialized forms to carry pollen. Soon, the forests were no longer only ferns, cycads, and conifers. Flowers began to paint the landscape with subtle color. Imagine walking through a forest in the late Cretaceous. Towering conifers still dominate, but beneath them, patches of flowering shrubs bloom in the filtered light. Bees, newly evolved, move from blossom to blossom, carrying the promise of new life. Small mammals creep among the roots, nibbling seeds and fruits. Dinosaurs feed not only on leaves, but now on the bounty of flowers and fruits that the new plants provide. The Green Kingdom is diversifying, transforming, preparing for a world beyond the dinosaurs. But for much of the Mesozoic, the forests remained primeval, timeless, filled with ferns and towering conifers that seemed eternal. Their silence was broken only by the sounds of life moving through them, the calls of dinosaurs, the beating of wings, the rustle of leaves in the wind at night. The forests were another world. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, silvering the fronds of ferns. The calls of nocturnal creatures echoed in the stillness. Glowworms and bioluminescent insects flickered with cold light, turning the shadows into a gentle constellation. Somewhere in the darkness, a small mammal foraged, pausing to listen for the approach of predators. The forest was never truly asleep. It was always alive, breathing, whispering with the slow rhythm of ancient time. Forests were witnesses. They stood as silent observers of everything that passed. They grew through ages of volcanic eruptions, through the drifting of continents, through the rise and fall of countless species. They watched the first dinosaurs appear, watched them flourish into giants, and watched them vanish again. Some of their descendants stand with us still. The cycads, the ferns, the conifers, living echoes of the world long before flowers. Next time you see a pine tree, you might pause and imagine. Its needles are shaped by a history older than any mountain. Its cones are part of a story that stretches back to the Mesozoic. Or, when you walk through a forest of ferns, notice how unchanged they seem, how their spiral fronds look just as they must have looked to a dinosaur's eye. The green world has always been here, steady and enduring, long after the footsteps of giants faded into stone. The forests of ferns and towering conifers remind us that Earth is not only shaped by animals, but by the quiet patience of plants. They do not move quickly, they do not roar or thunder, and yet they build the stage upon which every drama of life unfolds. Without their breath, their roots, their endless turning toward the sun, there could be no world for any creature at all. So as we walk through the lost world of the Mesozoic in our minds, let us not forget the Green Kingdom, the forests that grew in silence, that stretched their arms toward the light, that endured through ages. They were the true giants, the timeless ones, standing long before and long after the dinosaurs themselves. And when you breathe in the scent of pine, or hear the whisper of wind through conifer needles, you are listening to an echo of that ancient world, a whisper carried forward through millions of years, a memory of the forests that once sheltered the age of reptiles. Beneath the forests and oceans, beneath the skies filled with wings and shadows, the earth itself was moving. Slowly, silently, almost imperceptibly, the continents drifted. They carried forests and rivers, deserts and swamps, herds of dinosaurs, and swarms of insects. They carried mountains that rose like waves from the deep and valleys that opened into inland seas. That the story of the Mesozoic is not only a story of animals and plants, but of continents in motion, of a restless earth that never stands still. Imagine for a moment you are high above the planet, looking down, but not in the present, looking back more than 250 million. There are no separate Americas, no wide Atlantic Ocean, no frozen Antarctica. Instead, there is one vast landmass, a single supercontinent, stretching nearly from pole to pole. This was Pangea world continent, surrounded by the endless waters of a superocean called Panthalassa from space. Pangea looked immense, a continent so large that its heart was dry and desert-like, cut off from the rains carried by the sea. Great rivers ran outward from its highlands, carving their paths toward the coasts. Forests hugged the shores, but inland immense deserts spread like seas of red sand, dotted with hardy plants and creatures adapted to heat. It was upon this stage that the Triassic world began. Early reptiles wandered across the arid plains. Amphibians clung to rivers and lakes. The first dinosaurs appeared in scattered pockets. finding their way into a landscape where resources were scarce and survival demanded. It was alive with movement, driven by heat from deep within the planet. Beneath the rigid plates of the surface, molten rock churned and flowed, slowly shifting the continents above. At first, the changes were nearly invisible. A rift opened here, a mountain range rose there. Cracks deepened into rift valleys, valleys widened into seas, and the landmass split into two great continents, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. Shallow, warm expanse that would one day become the Mediterranean and beyond. Imagine standing at the edge of one of those rift valleys. The ground beneath your feet vibrates with distant tremors. Fissures split the land, filled with steaming pools and rivers of lava. Volcanic plumes rise in the distance, staining the skies with ash. New oceans are being born before your eyes. To us, such change would be catastrophic. But in the language of Earth's deep time, it was simply the slow pulse of the planet, the quiet breath of continents in motion. As the continents separated, climates shifted. Where once deserts stretched, across the heart of Pangea, now coastlines formed, bringing rains and moisture. Forests spread into new regions. The land became greener, more fertile, offering food and shelter for the rising dinosaurs. The great sauropods found vast plains to roam. Carnivores hunted in lush river valleys. The world was opening, becoming more diverse, more connected by seas and coastlines. Oceans, too, were transformed. The Tethys Sea teemed with life ammonites spiraling through the waters. Ichthyosaurs, darting like dolphins. Plesiosaurs, gliding with outstretched flippers. These shifting seas created new ecosystems, new possibilities for life. Laurasia itself divided further, splitting into what would one day become North America, Europe, and Asia. Gondwana broke into the landmasses that would become South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. Each fragment carried its forests, its rivers, its herds of dinosaurs. Creatures in one region drifted apart from those in another, slowly becoming distinct, unique, into new forms, untouched by the rest of the world. On another, mammals experimented with new strategies of survival. Separation encouraged diversity, and diversity gave rise to the endless variety of the Mesozoic world. But the drifting continents also brought upheaval. As plates collided, mountains rose. Imagine the birth of the Andes or the Himalayas, long before their modern forms. Their foundations laid in the movements of these ancient times, where plates pulled apart, rift valleys deepened, sometimes flooding with water to form inland seas. The western interior seaway of North America, for example, was born in the Cretaceous, splitting the continent into two. It stretched from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico, a warm inland ocean filled with mosasaurs, giant turtles, and schools of fish. Imagine waves lapping against shores where herds of hadrosaurs grazed, while above, pterosaurs wheeled through. The skies, the earth itself, was sculpting a world of variety, of contrast. High mountains, deep seas, vast deserts, and endless forests. Life followed these changes, adapted to them, thrived within them. The shifting continents were not simply background, they were the silent architects of life's unfolding story. Even Antarctica, far to the south, was not the frozen desert we know today. During the Mesozoic, it was covered with forests of ferns and conifers, warmed by a global climate far more temperate than ours. Herds of dinosaurs moved through its seasonal light and dark, feeding beneath the midnight sun or the long twilight of winter. Australia, still connected to Antarctica, for much of the Mesozoic, shared these forests, sea at a speed remarkable in geological terms. Imagine this isolated landmass, carrying its own unique ecosystems, moving silently across the ocean like a great green arc. Millions of years later, its collision with Asia would raise the Himalayas, but during the Mesozoic, it was a world unto itself, home to creatures found nowhere else. The continents never moved alone. Their drifting altered ocean currents, which in turn shaped winds and rainfall. It was a global system, every movement of land affecting the air and sea, and every shift in air and sea affecting life. The Mesozoic climate was warm, greenhouse-like, with no permanent ice at the poles. Sea levels rose high, flooding coasts, creating shallow seas where reefs and marine reptiles thrived. The earth was alive with water, with green, with heat, and it was the continents shifting that made it so. 2. Imagine these changes. You might picture the earth not as a still globe, but as a breathing, moving being. Its surface is a mosaic of plates, drifting slowly but irresistibly, colliding, partying, reshaping. Mountains rise and fall, oceans open and close, forests spread and vanish. And through it all, life adapts, flourishes, transforms in the silence of the night. Beneath the stars of the Mesozoic sky, the continents drifted, dinosaurs roared and fed, pterosaurs soared, mammals scurried, but all the while, beneath their feet, the earth was in motion. It was a movement too slow to notice, too vast to comprehend. Of continents, you are seeing only a moment, a snapshot in a long journey. The Atlantic Ocean is still widening. Africa still presses northward into Europe. Australia still drifts away into the Pacific. The continents are not fixed, they never were, currents of time. And so, the Mesozoic was not just the age of reptiles, but the age of shifting lands, of a restless earth painting new worlds upon itself. The dinosaurs, the forests, the oceans, they were all shaped by the slow dance of continents, a dance that continues even now beneath our feet. The ground you walk upon today was once desert, then sea, then forest. It was once part of another landmass, connected to other worlds. It has moved across latitudes, climates, and ages, carrying its quiet record of life. Every rock, every fossil, every grain of sand tells a piece of that journey. The shifting continents remind us of the vastness of time, of the patience of earth. They remind us that the world you know is not permanent, but part of an endless cycle of change. And they remind us, softly, that life is resilient, able to adapt and flourish no matter how the stage is rearranged. So when you imagine the Mesozoic, do not see it as one fixed world. See it as a moving canvas, a living stage, forever shifting, beneath the feet of the creatures that called it home. A world in motion, a planet that breathes. The age of reptiles did not last forever. For more than 180 million years, dinosaurs and their kin ruled the land, the skies, and the seas. They thrived through the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. They adapted to shifting continents. Two rising seas, two climates that warmed and cooled. They seemed eternal. And yet, in the end, the Mesozoic world fell silent. The end of the age came not with a whisper, but with thunder and fire. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Earth as it was 66 million years ago. In the late Cretaceous, the world is warm, lush, and full of life. Vast inland seas cover the heart of North America. Forests of flowering plants spread across the continents. Herds of horned dinosaurs roam the plains. Hadrosaurs graze like cattle, their calls echoing across the wetlands. Tyrannosaurs stalk in shadow in the skies. Pterosaurs glide on wide wings, while birds, true birds, already diverse dart between trees. In the oceans, mosasaurs and plesiosaurs hunt beneath the waves, while ammonites drift in spirals of shell. It is a world thriving, abundant, full of sound and motion. And then, on a day like any other, the sky is torn open. Far above, a rock the size of a mountain hurtles toward Earth. It has traveled across millions of kilometers of space, silent and unseen, until the final instant. It is an asteroid, roughly 10 kilometers wide, moving faster than sound, faster than the eye can follow. It is aimed at what will one day be the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The moment of impact is beyond imagination. In a fraction of a second, the asteroid strikes the shallow waters of the Cretaceous Sea. The energy released is greater than all the world's nuclear weapons combined, greater than the eruption of any volcano, greater even than the power of the sun upon the Earth in a single day. The sea rock melts. A crater more than 180 kilometers wide is carved into the crust of the planet. Shockwaves ripple outward, flattening forests, shattering life. The atmosphere ignites with incandescent heat. Fires race across continents. The sky itself seems to burn. If you had been standing anywhere near the impact site, you would not have survived to see what followed. But even far away, across the planet, the effects came swiftly. The Earth shuddered with earthquakes. Tsunamis, hundreds of meters high, raced across oceans, sweeping inland to wash away creatures and forests alike. Ash and vapor rose into the sky, billowing high above the stratosphere, spreading across the globe. And then darkness fell. The sun, once warm and constant, was hidden behind a shroud of dust and soot. For months, perhaps for years, the light of day was dim, cold, and faint. Plants withered. Forests fell silent. Without sunlight, photosynthesis faltered. The base of the food chain collapsed. In that darkness, the great reptiles struggled. Herbivores found no plants to eat. Carnivores found no prey. The oceans, too, grew barren as plankton died, and the creatures that fed upon them vanished. A world that had thrived with sound and motion grew quiet, still, empty. The dinosaurs, who had ruled for so long, dwindled. One by one, their species fell away. Great sauropods, once towering like living mountains, disappeared. Horned dinosaurs with their shields and frills vanished from the plains. Tyrannosaurs, apex hunters of the Cretaceous, lost their prey, and in losing it, they too were lost. In the seas, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs perished. Ammonites, who had drifted in oceans since long before the dinosaurs, spiraled into extinction. The skies, once filled with the vast wings of pterosaurs, grew quiet as their kind faded away. It was the end of the Mesozoic, an ending carved in fire and shadow. But though the asteroid is remembered as the harbinger of destruction, it was not the only force at work. Even before the impact, the Earth was restless. In what is now India, vast volcanic eruptions had already begun to shape the world. The Deccan Traps, a province of immense lava flows, erupted for hundreds of thousands of years, spilling fire across the land. The eruptions released gases into the atmosphere: carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, chemicals that warmed the climate and clouded the skies. It is possible that these eruptions weakened the ecosystems of the late Cretaceous, making them more vulnerable. When the asteroid struck, or perhaps the asteroid alone, was the decisive blow. In truth, the two forces together may have sealed the fate of the age of reptiles. Imagine standing in in that fading world. Forests smolder from fires, ash drifts like snow. The air tastes acrid, heavy with dust. The sky is a dim gray twilight, even at noon. Animals stagger through the silence, hungry, desperate, disoriented. One by one, they fall, yet not all life was lost. Some creatures endured, small mammals, hiding in burrows or beneath the shelter of forests, survived the long winters. Birds, those small, feathered descendants of theropod dinosaurs, persisted where the great reptiles could not. Crocodiles, turtles, and fish endured in the rivers and lakes. Seeds lay dormant in the soil, ready to sprout when the light returned. Extinction was not the end of life. It was a reshaping, a clearing of the stage. The thunder and fire of the asteroid's impact was the end of the Mesozoic, but it was also the beginning of something new. The age of mammals. The world that would one day give rise to us. And yet, even now, as you listen, you might feel the weight of that silence, that great pause in the history of life. For so long, dinosaurs had been the guardians of the earth, its most visible rulers. To imagine their sudden absence is to imagine a world emptied of its familiar heartbeats. It is to imagine plains without hadrosaurs, skies without pterosaurs, seas without mosasaurs, a planet fallen into shadow. We look back now and see their fossils, their bones locked in stone, their footprints pressed into ancient mud. We find the iridium layer in the rocks, a thin seam of cosmic dust that marks the moment of impact. We trace the crater at Chicxulub, buried beneath the Yucatan. We piece together the story, but we can only imagine what it felt like: the shock, the fire, the long darkness. The extinction was sudden in geological terms, but not instant for every creature. Some dinosaurs lingered in the shadows for years after the impact, dwindling slowly as food ran out. Some ecosystems held on longer than others, but by the end, the great lineages of the non-avian dinosaurs were gone. And yet, when we speak of extinction, we must remember the survivors. For though the age of the great dinosaurs ended, the age of birds began anew. Every bird you hear today, the sparrow, the eagle, the gull, the hummingbird, is a living remnant of the Mesozoic, a feathered echo of those who once strode upon the earth with thunder in their steps. Extinction is both an ending and a beginning. The thunder and fire that closed the Mesozoic opened the Cenozoic. The silence that followed made room for new voices. The mammals, small and overlooked for so long, began to rise. The forests regrew, the seas filled again with life, and upon this reshaped earth, the story of our own kind slowly began. But still, in the quiet of night, when you look at the stars, you might imagine that ancient fireball streaking across the sky. You might imagine the moment of impact, the wave of heat, the silence that followed. And in that imagining, you glimpse the fragility of life and the resilience of the earth. For life did not end. It endured, it adapted, it transformed. And in the ashes of the Mesozoic, it began again. The age of reptiles has ended. The last echoes of thunderous footsteps have faded. The skies, once filled with leathery wings, are quiet. The oceans, once patrolled by serpentine hunters, are still. Yet in the silence that followed, something lingers, a memory, a story etched into stone, into earth, into the very fabric of time. Tonight, we pause, not to rush through history, but to reflect, to linger in thought, to look back across the vast Mesozoic world and wonder what it meant, and what it still means for us today. Imagine yourself standing on the threshold of deep time. Behind you lies the Triassic dawn, when life was fragile and uncertain, when the world was recovering from its greatest extinction. Beyond that, the Jurassic, lush and green, where dinosaurs grew into giants and filled every corner of the land. And beyond still, the Cretaceous, a world blooming with flowers, with vast herds of horned dinosaurs, with swift predators, with seas alive and skies darkened by wings. It was an age of beauty and of strangeness. It was an age unlike any that has followed. The Mesozoic is gone, but the earth remembers. If you were to walk through a quiet desert today, you might notice the ripples in stone where an ancient river once flowed. In those ripples, dinosaurs may have left their tracks. You might see cliffs of sandstone rising like walls, each layer a page in the book of time. Some of those layers hold fossils, a tooth, a claw, the delicate imprint of a fern. These are the whispers of the Mesozoic, still present, still speaking. If we know how to listen, and perhaps, when you hear the cry of a bird, you are hearing something older than it seems. That sound carries with it the echo of a raptor's call, the distant memory of a creature that once perched in Cretaceous forests. Feathers rustling in the wind. The Mesozoic is not entirely lost. It lingers all around us in stone, in air, in the living creatures who remain. But let us reflect more deeply. What lessons lie in this vanished age? The first lesson is of resilience. Life endured through cycles of catastrophe and renewal. At the beginning of the Triassic, life on Earth was nearly extinguished. 90% of species had perished in the Permian extinction. Yet from that shadow rose the ancestors of the dinosaurs, the first small mammals, the first gliding reptiles. From ruin came renewal. And when the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, though the world was reshaped, life did not stop. Birds, mammals, insects, plants, they carried the flame forward. In this, the Mesozoic shows us the strength of life itself, its ability to bend but not break, to fall and yet rise again. The second lesson is of impermanence. No rule lasts forever. Dinosaurs seemed eternal. For more than 160 million years, they dominated the Earth. Compare that to us humans, who have walked the Earth for only a few 100,000 years. By the measure of deep time, we are but a spark, and yet, even the dinosaurs fell. Even the mightiest can fade. This thought humbles us. It reminds us that the Earth does not belong to any single creature. It belongs to time, to change, to cycles of growth and decline. We too are part of that cycle. The third lesson is of wonder. The Mesozoic was not only a time of survival, but of creativity. Life experimented in endless forms, creatures with sails upon their backs, with horns upon their brows, with wings of leather or feathers. Some were immense, towering like mountains. Others were delicate, no larger than your hand. Some swam, some flew, some burrowed. All were threads in a vast, living tapestry. And when we look upon their bones today, when we imagine them walking once more beneath alien skies, we are reminded of how strange and beautiful life can be, how infinite the possibilities. Close your eyes and picture it. A late Jurassic forest, heavy with the scent of ferns. The ground shakes as a herd of Diplodocus moves slowly between trees, their necks sweeping like cranes over the canopy. Above them, pterosaurs ride the wind, their wings catching the light of the setting sun. In the shadows, a small mammal scurries, unnoticed, beneath roots. The air is warm. The world is alive. You are standing in a moment long gone, yet still present in your imagination. These reflections are more than science. They are meditations. They remind us not only of what was, but of what is. The earth is ancient, life is fragile, time is vast, and in that vastness we are small yet connected. The fossils we find are not simply bones, they are bridges. They link us to a time beyond memory, to creatures who lived and breathed, who felt the warmth of sun, the chill of night, the hunger of life. They remind us that we too are part of this great chain. We walk upon the same earth, we breathe the same air, drink the same waters, see the same stars, and though the dinosaurs are gone, their story is not, for we carry it forward. Think of the birds outside your window. They are not simply birds, they are the last branch of a tree that once held giants. They are living dinosaurs, feathered and small, but survivors of thunder and fire. To hear them sing is to hear the persistence of life across extinction, across time, and think of yourself. You, too, are part of this story. For the extinction that ended the Mesozoic cleared the path for mammals to rise. Without it, we might never have come to be. In this sense, the asteroid did not only end an age, it also made space for a new one. For us, that this is perhaps the most humbling reflection of all, that we owe our existence to a moment of destruction, that the silence of dinosaurs made room for the voice of humankind. The Mesozoic is gone, but it lives within us, in our curiosity, in our science, in our wonder. When we hold a fossil in our hands, when we visit a museum and see the skeleton of a tyrannosaur or a triceratops, we are touching not only stone, but time itself. We are reaching back across millions of years to meet the gaze of creatures who once ruled the world, and perhaps, in that moment, we feel both awe and kinship. For though they are gone, they remind us that life is fragile, fleeting, but also enduring. As we bring this reflection to a close, let us imagine the earth one last time in the Mesozoic. The forests are green, the skies are filled with wings, the seas are alive with shadows. On the plains, herds of dinosaurs move like rivers of life. The world hums with sound, with movement, with endless variety. And then, slowly, the scene fades. The thunder of footsteps grows quiet. The wings fold, the seas still. The earth turns, as it always does, carrying the memory of what was into what will be. The Mesozoic is gone, but it is not forgotten. It is written in stone, in stars, in the quiet beating of your own heart, which owes its rhythm to the long story of life on this planet. And so, as you rest tonight, remember that you are part of that story. A small chapter in an endless book, a fleeting moment in an eternal sky. The age of reptiles is over, the age of mammals has begun, and the earth continues, patient, enduring, alive. Good night.